Hey everybody, happy Tuesday, and we want to welcome you to another edition of the One Hood Power Hour. I'm your host, Royce Jones, and I'm here hosting this broadcast with one of the endorsed candidates for the April 23rd primary today. As a reminder, today's actually the deadline to request your mail-in ballot. So if you're not going to be in the area to vote, make sure you request your mail-in ballot by 5 p.m. today. We will give you another reminder about that towards the end of this stream. Let's talk about the position. So the House of Representatives is responsible for introducing and voting on bills, resolutions, and amendments, and for approving the budget. Representatives also serve on various policy committees. So we would like to welcome to the One Hood Power Hour, Congressional candidate Summer Lee. Thanks for being here today, Summer.
Hey, Royce. It's good to be with you.
Yes, likewise. So first of all, where are we? Talk to us about where you are, what you're doing today.
Yeah, so I am here in DC. We spent a lot of time here. I think a lot of people are always wondering, how much time did we spend in DC? So this is my DC apartment because we're here, or house because we're here so much. I do have a roommate because I'm not balling that much, but we're here for one last week. We actually won't be in session next week for the election, but it's not because of the election, because we're federal, which means that we're in session lots of weeks when people have primaries. So we're here voting this week. We actually don't even know when we're going to get out. So hopefully I'll be home anytime between Thursday and Saturday, depending on when we vote.
Wow. Okay. So you work it up until the bitter end, it looks like.
You know what? It's we're here. So for this month, we are here 3 weeks out of the month. So typically we're here about 4 days out of the week. So how we think about it is like we're in DC 4 days and we're in district 3 days. So that's how we kind of break up our week.
Got it. So we have so much to talk about today. We'll be going through a variety of questions from several different sort of categories, exploring the role of this position. So I guess to ease into it, we'll ask you, why do you think you're the most qualified candidate for the 12th Congressional District?
I think that what we need to see in our political system is a recalibration, right? I think a lot of people think that our political system is supposed to be filled with people who all share the same perspective, who all look the same way, who all have the same background. And I do have a legal background, but the reality is that the thing that makes one most qualified is their lived experiences, their perspectives, and their educational experiences all combined. I grew up in this region. I've lived out many of the worst, impacts of policy decisions that are made at every level of government. And I've helped to address them and to solve them, not just through my advocacy, my organizing, but also as a legislator. I was a 2-term state legislator where I served for 4 years. Working on issues spanning the gamut from police accountability to environmental justice to workers' rights and labor unions and wages to healthcare and abortion access. And the Congress, where I've served for over a year, just over a year, I've been able to help through my committee work serve on everything that helps Pittsburgh, from science-based and technology, which was not my thing, but we quickly learned, to oversight, to make sure that we're holding our government accountable to its promises and to an appropriate allocation of its resources. We've been able to do all of that, but mostly I'm Black and I grew up in the Mon Valley. When we talk about the urgency, the scope, the scale that we need to address our issues, we need to elect people who recognize that the way to do things, the way that things have been done in the past, will only lead to the past results. But if we are serious about the policies, the progressive or liberal policies that we care about, then we need people who do their politics in those ways too.
Right. So you have a lived experience, you have a work experience, and from those two vantage points, what do you think is one of the biggest issues in the 12th district specifically, and what kind of legislation would you like to introduce to address whatever that issue is, the biggest one?
Yeah, that's always a really hard question because the 12th congressional district, unlike some others, right, is actually a really diverse district, right? We go from the city of Pittsburgh, where we have all of it, to the South Hills, down into the Mon Valley, and we even go into Westmoreland County, right? So if you ask a
Right.
person, you know, in Westmoreland County, what the biggest issue is it the exact same as somebody living in Homewood, right? The answer might not be the same, but I think that there are undercurrents, right?
We'll give you three. We'll give you three. Pick three.
Oh, thank you. That's even better. I would say wages, right? Wages and cost of living is an issue that we are seeing all over the country, right? No matter where you live, there are people who are finding that they're working, 40 or more hours a week, but yet housing is out of reach. Appropriate housing, right? Groceries, the cost of groceries out of reach. The cost of transportation of living out of reach. So I will say that cost of living is a big issue across this district. I would say, so with that, housing, healthcare, and I think another one that I would probably say is environmental, right? Even if you don't rank environmental justice as a top issue for you, is there. In our region, we have some of the worst air quality in the nation. We have elevated levels of lead in our water. So we have environmental justice issues that are unique to our region, but also I would say common for regions that have Black, brown, and working class people.
And so I guess, my thing is too, right? So throughout the election, really any election, you see there's a majority of candidates in their campaign is always this is at stake, or this is at stake, or this is at stake. There's always something at stake. So for you, what is that thing? What's at stake with this election?
I don't really like hyperbole, but I actually do, in this instance, join in with Democrats when we say that democracy really is at stake. I
Mhm.
will say that democracy has always been tenuous. There are always threats to it that we have to take seriously. But I think that in the last cycles, what we've seen through the insurrection, which I consider an ongoing insurrection, the attacks that we're seeing, the money in politics, all of those things are making our democracy weaker and weaker and weaker. But the people who are impacted most are going to be the most vulnerable and the most marginalized, right? Black and brown folks. So when you think that your democracy is at risk, then that puts into perspective everything else, right? Abortion rights, obviously, we see that. We've seen abortion rights being eroded. And that's because of the way that they've stolen the courts, right? All of those things fall when we've lost our democracy, like when our democracy is not working the way it is, when our representative government fails to be or live up to its cause and its charge to be representative. So I think that is the very big thing that we have to deal with, right? I don't take Trump lightly at all. We've seen him. We've lived through him. All of our most marginalized populations are at risk, where we see not just Trump, but the people who are his like acolytes, like the Marjorie Taylor Greens. Those type of people are emboldened by him, and they are seizing office, and they are wielding their powers in the ways that you expect white supremacists to wield power, and we cannot take that lightly.
Right, right. And speaking of democracy, there's always questions and concerns and comments about how elections are run. So from your perspective, like, are there any policies that you might want to introduce to sort of ensure, the constitutional rights of people to have fair and accessible and equal elections?
Yes, absolutely. The first thing that I think that we need to introduce, period, right? When we talk about democracy reform, which is always the first thing that the Democrats will introduce, right? The John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act, which covers, same day registration for people. How many people do we know think they're going to be able to vote, turn up on election day and find out that they're not registered, or they're not registered at their address, right? That's not a barrier that we should have in the United States. Getting rid of so many of our kind of racist voter ID laws. There are still states that have those. And we need to nationalize that process, making election day a national holiday. There are people who really don't have access to voting on election day, and they might not live in a state that offers early voting or mail-in voting. In fact, Pennsylvania only offered those things in the year 2020 was the first time that we had access to early voting and no fault or no excuse absentee ballots. But for me, the most important thing that we really need to do is we need finance reform. We need election finance reform. We can do all of that. Every key issue that we have in this country, if your issue is gun violence, if your issue is environmental justice, if your issue is abortion care, racial justice, all of those things are all tied up by money and politics. What we see, I'm the perfect example of it, right? Billionaires, Republican billionaires love to target me, love to target Pittsburgh because someone like me is in that seat. But what they're really doing is they're targeting people who they think can't raise that type of money and communities that they know can't get that type of money on their own. So what they're basically doing is they're looking at Black and brown communities, poor working class communities, and they're sending you a representative instead of you being able to send the system its representative, because we can't keep up with how much it costs to run races. And our race, this is a congressional seat every 2 years, and it might cost you millions of dollars to not just like get in the race, but to win the seat, and then millions more to keep the seat. Think about why we can't get Black folks, queer folks, disabled folks, poor and working folks in the Senate, right? We're talking 50 million, 100 million, $200 million to run for a Senate seat. Power should not cost that much if it is a representative democracy. What happens is a corporation gets a bigger vote than you, than me, and that needs to change.
Right, and I think it's something like $7 million that will be spent to sort of prevent your winning your seat, right, throughout your political career. So like that's, I don't even know how many. Yeah, that's according to estimates. So that's a lot of money to try to gatekeep and prevent somebody from making a difference and a change. So it's just, I mean, you know, like you go through it, right? You have ads, political ads targeting you, people targeting you. So can you even share advice to people who are coming up in their political career about how to sort of navigate that, and they're really trying to create some change on more of a micro scale?
Yeah, that's actually the biggest concern, or I would say beef, that I take with those type of ads and those tactics. I think that negative campaigning is inherently disenfranchising. It makes people not want to participate in the system because it reinforces that idea that politics is inherently evil. And that if you go to serve your community, then you must be evil also, or you must attract evil, right? You have to withstand evil that most people just don't want to do. I remember in my last election where they did spend $4.5 million, where I had little kids come up to me crying, right? Little kids multiple times because of how nasty the ads were. But because they looked at me, right? A woman, a Black woman, somebody who they can relate to, and for the first time related to somebody in this position. And those type of tactics make not me shrink, right? They make them shrink. They make the people who look up to us, the people who are part of our movement, feel like this is hopeless. So for me, you know, I don't know that my advice can be to those people, right? My advice has to be to the people who want their jobs at any, you know, by any means necessary. The people who employ those tactics don't realize how much it hurts all of us. They think they're just hurting me, but if we disenfranchise, if we, you know, suppress the votes of the people who our Democratic coalition needs, then it actually hurts all of us. So I would say to people who are thinking about running, you know your truth, you know, you talk to your community, you know who you are, you have to really avoid letting people define you and letting those boxes kind of keep you suppressed and keep you in. And I would say, you know, you stick to your North Star. If you're compelled to do this because you have a spirit of service, because you have ideas that our country and our government needs, then you know that might be a part of it. But when your North Star is like justice or accountability or freedom or liberation, whatever it might be, you just have to keep that close. And you have to drown out the rest of that because you recognize that your cause is greater than, you know, the people who are running up against you.
And honestly, that's advice that we can all take because, you know, just us as citizens, right? Like me sitting at home as a Black queer person, seeing some of those ads, like it doesn't just shrink you as the candidate, like, you know, it shrinks us too at home because, you know, some of the messaging really translates to just any, you know, anybody, any like Black person, any marginalized person, any queer person. And like the, you know, just some of the attacks and the things they say, it's like, it's not just like watching them try to prevent you from doing something or achieving something. It's like it completely shrinks us at home and everything that we stand for and represent.
That's precisely what they're trying to do.
Yeah.
And I think that as we spend this, you know, this time together talking about policy, we'll do something that these ads don't do, right? They attempt to take away the nuance And we're sitting here as marginalized people talking about the policy, talking about the ideas that we have, the thing that impacts us. And it can be very damaging if people are telling you, if you have a candidate that is saying, I believe that everyone should have clean air and clean water. All right, I believe that everybody should have a living wage for their job. And then the messaging, consistent messaging coming down is that that's extreme.
Right.
Yeah, because what it sounds like they're saying is that our survival is extreme, that we're asking for too much.
Yeah, like we don't deserve XYZ. Yes. I want to take a bit of a left turn and actually touch on some climate points with you today while we have you. So we want to know, what policies do you plan on championing to develop climate sustainable standards that would reduce how corporations actually engage with extractive resource economies like we're seeing in the Congo?
So, oh my goodness, I'm so happy that you asked that. So, as a member of SST, right, that's one of my two committees. I'm a member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee and the Oversight Committee. On Science, Space, and Technology, we have oversight over all of the departments, right, NASA or NIST, or other people who conduct this sort of research, conduct these sort of businesses. And one of the things that we talk about a lot every time that we have an opportunity when people are coming before us is in our question line. We get 5 minutes to ask questions of some of these people. And on a number of occasions, we've taken the opportunity to talk about the extractive practices. For instance, even when we think about environmentally, what we think of environmental sustainability, right? Electric vehicles, things of that nature. There is a huge extractive component, for instance, in the Congo with cobalt. And we've asked these companies, what are they doing to incentivize or to make sure that they are not incentivizing, or that they are not allowing people who extract or people who use those practices, right, that they're not contributing to them. And I've asked that, and now I believe of 3 different witnesses who have come in, right? Because part of this is making sure that they're aware of this, right? We can't, as the United States, say that we believe in the climate change. We believe in new policies that would promote resiliency, sustainability, safety here in the United States, but also contributing through investments or otherwise in places that we don't care about, right? Where it's okay for them to be harmed, right? So I've actually used my question line to definitely make sure that we're holding our companies, our United States government to the same standards that we have here in the Democratic Republic of Congo and elsewhere. But also when we think about those sort of practices, it's also incentivize American companies. One of the biggest policy pieces or policies that we had in the last Congress, not our Congress where we were being pretty unproductive, but in the last Congress, we passed the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is almost a misnomer because it's actually an environmental piece. It is the largest climate, piece of legislation that we've had maybe ever. But what it does is a lot of the monies, the resources, the grants that municipalities, other folks can draw down from, large pieces of them have built into them incentives for environmental sustainability, for transition, right? You get more points if you use renewable resources as opposed to, for instance, fossil fuel resources. And we've been able to help connect, people in our district to those resources, which is a it's a two-pronged approach, right? Because we've been hyper-focused on it in Western Pennsylvania, we've been able to draw down dollars for like the I-376 project, right? Where we'll be able to fix the roads, fix the bathtub, but we're also going to be able to do it in a more sustainable way, a more resilient way, because we're flood prone, right? We're flood prone, we're mudslide prone, and we need to address weatherization, right? So that we don't have bridges collapsing, and it creates good union jobs, which we can help to incentivize on the other end too. So we do both. So we are continuing to push up and lift up those policies on a dollar side, on the organizational side with the government, to make sure that our government is not partnering to do those things in other countries. And we're still pushing for the big kind of things that we care about, like a Green New Deal, a just transition. There are so many pieces that we still need to implement today that are not going to be easy. They're not going to be, a wand solution, but we need to start practicing, putting in place different practices to prepare our economy, for that green transition.
And yeah, and I do want to talk about, and you touched on it a bit, about the flooding and sort of the climate change impact here in Pittsburgh. So many people are now kind of like waking up and seeing the impact, right? And They're seeing the roads be shut down. They're seeing the bathtub being flooded. They're seeing Point State Park and basically downtown, being a fishbowl.
Yeah.
And so everybody is sort of top of mind for them. At least people who I've been talking to about it is, oh well, that everybody's favorite line. That's that climate change for you. That's climate change for you. And so, do you think that's a direct impact? And how do we solve it? And what are some things that we can do?
So I would say yes, and right, it is climate change, and it is also infrastructure. It's also an infrastructure thing at the same time, right? As we see, when we say it's climate change, it's because what we're acknowledging is that as our globe warms, right, we're seeing different impacts all along the way, right? We're seeing more harsh winters, right? Everybody's like, oh, well, it's below zero, but climate change. We're like, yes, that actually impacts it. Actually, yes, that's the reason why it is much colder in Pittsburgh than it used to be. Less snow, more ice, right? In the winter, in the summer times, it's hotter, obviously, but we're seeing more extreme weather events, right? More rain. We're from Pittsburgh, y'all, and I've never seen this much rain. This is a bit much.
Right.
More rain. We're seeing more severe storms. In different places, we're seeing more severe tropical storms like hurricanes, things of that nature. All of those things then weigh on our infrastructure. And the United States has historically and notoriously bad infrastructure. Like, we don't invest in it at the rates that we do. What's happening is that, the last big infrastructure influx that we had, aside from the Infrastructure Reduction Act that we are now implementing, before that was the New Deal. And that was like the last time that we saw nationwide an influx into upgrading our infrastructure. So we're looking in Pittsburgh at bridges, roads, pipes that are all 100 years older, houses that are over 100 years old. So this weather or this rain, yeah, your roof is going to collapse faster because of the rain. That's climate change. Yes, absolutely. The roads are deteriorating faster. Now, when we're talking about what we can do about it, how do we that's climate resiliency. When we're putting in and we're investing dollars into infrastructure, we need to do it in a resilient way. So we're not just going to rebuild the road. We're not going to just expand a road, which is going to put more cars. We need to talk about, how do we invest in electric vehicles? Certainly. How do we invest in public transportation to get people off of those congested roads? How are we building in a way that is resilient and sustainable, right? Do we need a retaining wall because we are prone to flood, right? Does the Army Corps of Engineers need to step in and come up with new designs for our dams, for things of that nature, so that we are addressing at the root some of these issues? So it's an infrastructure issue, and it is a climate change, yes, and a weatherization issue.
I guess, one thing I want to ask is, where is everybody? It's like, you just listed, 10 different things that we could do right now today to solve a majority of the issues that we're all suffering from. So what's sort of the pause, right? Like, why isn't it already being done?
Well, it's a resource issue, right?
Okay.
We have, so for instance, one of the bills that I've introduced this year with my namesake, Barbara Lee, my auntie Barbara Lee, and a couple others, is the Oligarch Act. We have so many pressing issues in the United States that we have answers to. We know the answers, right? But we don't have the dollars. We don't have the resources. Yesterday was tax day. I hope that you either filed your taxes or your extension, if you did not do that. But for the United States, right, we still have companies like Amazon, right, Bezos, Elon Musk, all of these people who are essentially evading federal level taxes, right? They're not paying at a tax rate that is beneficial to the rest of the country. So while we're seeing the wealthy get even more wealthy, and when I say more wealthy, we're talking about billionaires who are exponentially growing their wealth. And we saw that throughout the COVID crisis, right? Oil and gas industry, so fossil fuel industries, Bezos, and even closer to home, like, right, UPMC, right? We're seeing these companies, these entities, and these billionaires who are not paying their fair share in their taxes. And because of that, we're not able to fund the things that we need to in the United States. We're talking about a country, the richest country in the world, that does not have universal health care, that does not have a universal education system from pre-K to college, but other countries do have these things. And that's because they're paying taxes, right? And not just working people. The problem that most working people have with taxes is a losing issue in our country, because what's been happening throughout time is that poor people, working people, are paying, a disproportionate rate of their money than rich people, right? Poor people feel like their dollars aren't going anywhere. You're paying all these dollars in taxes and your road still has potholes in it. Your kid is still going to an underfunded school. But the real issue is that we're not even tapping into the source. When we allow those people to evade taxes, the rest of this country suffers.
Yeah. And with that, I mean, things are just not, it's not easy to live in the US right now financially, right? Like wages aren't going anywhere. People aren't getting raises. Cost of living keeps going up. Groceries are high. Gas is high. Like it's expensive to be here. And so what kind of resolutions do you have? One, to help ease inflation and also reduce the cost of living for people.
Certainly. By all markers, right? And the administration talks about this a lot, right? That rate, the inflation rate, things of that nature are coming down. But what's ended up happening is that everyday people are not seeing that because groceries are still expensive, things of that nature. I think the first thing that we propose is the most obvious, right? Pennsylvania still has a $7.25 minimum wage. Of all of the states that are around us, we are the only state that is still set to the federal minimum wage. So even if the Pennsylvania legislature were to raise the wage, which is great, it shouldn't be incumbent on the state to do that. The United States federal government needs to raise the minimum wage at a rate that does not make people fall off of the benefits cliff, right? Because we know, and particularly in Black and brown communities, right, people can do math. We know that if you are making $10, $12 an hour, if you get raised up a couple dollars, you're going to lose your housing subsidies. You're going to lose your Medicare, right? Your kid may no longer qualify for WIC or CHIP, those types of benefits that are still incredibly necessary, but then you would lose. We know that you have to make a certain amount over what is even the fight for 15 to still be able to make up the difference in the loss and insurance and things of that nature. So we need the wage set at an actual living wage, a living wage. We are far past 15, right? At this point, for people, Americans, to even afford like a 1-bedroom house, a 2-bedroom house, right? We need to be way closer to like 22, 25. Which is a heavy lift in a government like ours, a split government. But that's the first thing. So ensuring that we have raised the wages. The second thing is ensuring that everybody has the appropriate workers protections, right? There's a reason why we are strong, and pro-union in this town. We know the people who will be lifted up most by unionization actually are Black people, Black and brown people, poor and working class people lift up when they have access to a union. Right? Because they then have access to benefits, shared benefits, whether they be pension or health insurance and more. But those worker protections also expand to paid sick leave and family leave, hazard pay, things of that nature that workers should have so that they're not struggling to work 2-3 jobs. Then we need to address the housing stock. Yes, I'm hitting on a number of things, right? Because it is multifaceted. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Addressing housing stock, right? We need to invest in affordable housing and to building affordable housing. We were happy to be able to draw down $50 million from HUD to help to bring to the Hill District, the historic Hill District. We know that that's just that's like a small bite of the pie. We have so much more that we need to do, investing in programs so that people are housed appropriately in the neighborhoods that they call home. So housing costs, when we build more, invest in more federal, affordable housing and put money into that, people can afford housing. And we're seeing even Pittsburgh getting unaffordable, where we used to be notoriously an affordable place. But those are just like starting points.
Yeah. And right. And for the record, I've talked to people on the other side of the argument that are, oh, we need to keep, minimum wage down or whatever. And none of them are making $7.25 an hour. They're all being paid exorbitant.
Even when people say, well, you know what, if we increase too quickly, how small businesses will be impacted. I don't want to hear McDonald's talk about if we raise the wage to 15, then what about their overhead? What about your take-home pay, CEO? Right? That's really what's going to be impacted, is the take-home pay of the CEO. But also what they'll say, well, the cost of a burger will go up. And I was like, and more people will be able to afford a burger.
Correct.
But also, even when we talk about $7.25, still scratching the surface, there are many, many Americans who make what we call the sub-minimum wage of closer to $2.83, right? That's waitresses, hospitality workers, and workers with disability, right? Disabled workers are legally paid sub-minimum wage and then still expected to somehow survive in the same role and with the same expenses as everyone else.
Right. And with that too, let's talk about the wage gap and how that can be addressed. And I also want to ask you sort of, has the idea of what the wage gap looks like changed and morphed over time? You know, like, so of course, wage gap among women and men, those who identify, wage gap between races, and now, like, does it look different than it used to? Like, is it just those two categories, or is it more?
Yeah, so I don't want to speak out of turn. It feels like, from as far as I know, that that is not shifting enough.
Mm-hmm.
There are certain historic, gaps that we have not closed.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a couple weeks or so ago was, like the Women's Wage Gap Day, like Equal Pay Day for women, which we know is the average of all women. When you further disaggregate between Black women, Latinas, Indigenous women, Asian women who actually do make more than white women by and large, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those dates can go even further into the calendar year. A couple things, right? The gender wage gap, there are theories, really good theories backed by data about how we close that. Actually, one of the hardest conversations we're having right now actually does play directly into the gender wage gap. And it is the argument, the debate about whether people should come back into the office to work, right? As we see downtowns struggling nationwide since COVID, when everything shut down, just overnight. There were certain people who were harmed by it, right? Downtown spaces, the retail that are in those downtown areas, or those business districts, right, that no longer have the same influx of clientele, right? Those are struggling. But
Yeah.
who's actually getting a little bit of a benefit are women, more than others, right? The biggest thing that plays into the gender wage gap or is access, right? Women are more inclined to have to take care of home duties and work duties. So the thing that makes men excel is being able to advance in the workplace, right? You start at the entry level and men advance quicker. They're more available to answer emails at night, to phone calls at night, to work overtime, because they're not the ones who have to go home and take care of an aging parent or a sick child, right? So where women don't have paid sick and family leave, right? They're just getting demerits. So they're not advancing at the same rate. So their lifetime income is smaller or less than the lifetime income of men who are advancing quicker in workplaces because they don't have the same responsibilities at home. When women get to work from home, or disabled people get to work from home, right? These populations of people have access to different jobs, to more jobs, because they don't have the added burden of having to commute in and out. So that's a balance that we have to weigh. How do we address both of those issues at once without making, one population suffer? For Black folks, we know that there's still discrimination on the workplace, right? We know that Black people are still more likely to go to schools that are underfunded, to live in communities, right, that have more environmental, and health hazards. That leads to lifetime impacts. Lifetime outcomes are diminished because of the start that you have. The community that you come to is a better predictor of where you'll go than almost any other thing. So when we're talking about how do we address the racial wage gap, we need to talk about how we make sure that irrespective of your zip code, your kid has a quality education in the wealthiest nation on earth, making sure that colleges and universities are not so unaffordable that working class people can't access them, right? Or if you access them, that you then have a lifetime of debt, or even the trade programs that we know are lucrative. A lot of students don't even know they exist. So how are we making sure that we are addressing the access gap for Black, brown, poor and working people earlier than later?
Right. And it's not just disparities in education and wages. It's also in healthcare, attention to mental health, things like that, right? Like tens of millions of people are paying higher rates for unsatisfactory care. And so Black Maternal Health Week actually just wrapped up, and we know that Black women are up to 3 times more likely to die during childbirth. I mean, with those statistics, it's obviously startling. What can we do to address things like that?
Definitely. And just to add on to that, in Pittsburgh, we have the United States obviously has a startling rate in the what we call the developed world, right? Pittsburgh has a higher rate in the United States. So in Pittsburgh, we're seeing more Black women and birthing people die in childbirth, and their babies die within 1 year. There are a number of things that have been proposed, and a number of wonderful organizations and people who have been working on this, right? We see places like Healthy Start that have been working on this, even places like New Voices for Reproductive Justice have in the past and the current and present been working on this. And Black women who are now in legislative leadership are able to now lift this up, because first of all, it was a piece about reproductive care that was just falling by the wayside. Right. A lot of people were talking and hyper focused on abortion care, which is important. But we know that there are Black women and birthing people who want to give birth, but can't be guaranteed that they'll survive the process. What we have proposed in packages of legislation like the one I'm supporting and help to introduce here at the federal level, the Momnibus, which addresses various things, trying to hit this from every single angle. One of the things that we know about the maternal mortality rate is that it's not just on the day, the moment of birth, but the maternal mortality rate actually extends into the first year postpartum. So what ends up happening is there's a lot of poor and working class women and birthing people. They drop off of the Medicare that they got when they were pregnant, when they were, carrying their child. They then had access to Medicare so that they can get prenatal care. But they drop off of Medicare very quickly after that because it doesn't extend into postpartum care. So that's why we see those rates higher than that's why the rate is so high, is because so many women and birthing people are falling off of health insurance. So the Momnibus would address that, right? To make sure that Medicare access extends into 1 year postpartum so that women and birthing people and the babies are not missing the important appointments that they have at various important stages, right? You go home, you got to come back, right, to be checked up. That's where we're falling off. People are falling off, and healthcare professionals are missing that. Discrimination, right, in the medical field is a thing, right? The fact that Black women and birthing people are dying irrespective of socioeconomic status indicates a disparity or biases in the practice itself. So we need to address that. And making sure that whatever those biases are actually being accounted in the medical profession, medical practices, and medical education, because that's a very important thing. I'm not going to say theories about that I have out loud, but my cousin is a gynecologist and we have talked about it, but I'm going to let her come and talk about it one day. But those are, we have bills that would provide doula care. Black women, Black and brown women and birthing people often feel that they don't have advocates when they are in the birthing process. So we know from, for instance, Serena Williams, right? A wealthy, way wealthier than us, woman who should have had the best care, had to advocate for herself when she felt off. Too often, Black people will report to their doctor that something does not feel right, and the doctor will push it aside because of myths about how much pain we can experience, or whether or not we are being hysterical. So now we have the double-edged sword of being Black and women at the same time. So doula care, making sure that there are advocates with Black women and birthing people, is one of those critical pieces that we can actually provide and address. So those are just a part of the Momnibus and other things that we see at federal and state levels. That was long, but sorry, I'm passionate about it, and it's still birthing week for me because they should have got 7 days instead of 6.
Yeah, listen, hey, that's thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that. And like you sort of touched on, I mean, a lot of it has to do with discrimination. Majority of it has to do with discrimination and many of the cases that we talked about. And so, I mean, it's not just there, I mean, it's everywhere. And we see incidences of discrimination, hate speech, racism, homophobia, queerphobia, transphobia, every phobia. We continue to see that rise in this political and social climate. Is that something that can be addressed legislatively?
Yes and no, right? It is a cultural thing. And to address those things go hand in hand. We'll see legislative shifts as we see cultural shifts. But the reality is, and what we know as Black folks, right, as multi-time marginalized people, is that we've been sounding alarms for generations. But even more recently, as people have claimed that the United States is a post-racial society, it was Black people who were shouting that that's not true. right, that were sounding alarms, where we saw pieces of legislation that were chipping away, eroding at the progress that we've made. Right now, we're in a time where we're seeing nationwide Republicans waging what we're calling their culture wars, right? But the way it's playing out is in Florida, bans that are impacting trans children, queer people, particularly children, education bans, book bans, right? What type of education can you receive? Can you learn about Black history, about other marginalized people's history? When you decline people access to a quality education that is well-rounded, when you deny people access to the knowledge of self, for Black and brown people who we would be losing that, or white folks who lose a knowledge of their compatriots, right? It contributes to the supremacy. It contributes to this idea of white supremacy. It contributes to this idea that what has happened in our country was not that bad, was not bad enough to learn from, and thus easy enough to repeat. We're seeing attacks on DEI, which is really, really impacting our universities and our jobs, corporations and universities that now are not able to implement the practices that they need to not just attract Black and brown and marginalized students or employees, but to retain them, right? Which then has impacts on our generational wealth building capabilities, our ability to stay secure, access housing, things of that nature. We still have laws on the books in different states and places, right? Where if you are queer, you may not be able to rent. You can be legally evicted. You can legally lose your job. Right, Pennsylvania was once such state until very, very recently, and I think did that even get signed into law yet? So yes, we have to legislate it. Absolutely, there are so many ways in which we can address legislation. Some of them are very obvious, right? Just addressing racist systems. Some of them are less obvious, right? Equitably funding education, right? Incentivizing culturally competent practices and jobs, those type of things. So yes, and. Racists need to feel like they should not be comfortable in our society. And let's be real, they feel comfortable in our society again. And when you feel comfortable, you feel empowered and emboldened. And that's actually what we're seeing. They just feel like they can get away with stuff.
Because they are, they feel like because they are getting away with it, on the, some of the like the anti-LGBTQ plus laws. It's actually scary to see things that are legislative movements in places like Russia, right, where you can be highly fined or put in prison for promoting, I don't remember the name of the law, but for being queer publicly. And to think that that's a reality, and then you actually have people here in the U.S. that are advocating for that here, who want that.
And we're seeing it happen. I think that the other thing that a lot of blue states or liberal states, the mistakes that we make, right? Too often we say, well, you know what? If you're queer or you're Black or you're brown or you're an immigrant, why would you live in a Florida or a Georgia or a Texas? First of all, Black folks, brown folks, we have rich histories in those areas. So no, the answer is not just that we leave. Right. Or people who feel like, well, it's happened in another state. That is not something that can happen to us. But Pennsylvania is a really good example of a state that, we're not, we're not Florida, we're not Texas, but the only thing that keeps us from being those are our elections. Right. When we elect a Democratic governor, we are able to fight back against some of the worst policies that Republicans will propose. I served in the legislature when we were in the minority. And when I tell you that every terrible bill you have ever seen come out of a Florida or a Texas, whether they're bills attacking our trans and queer community, they're bills attacking Black and brown folks or immigrants, refugees, we had them. We had those bills that ran and passed in our House. They just got vetoed when they got to a governor. So none of us are too far away. If it can happen to any of our neighbors, any of our loved ones in any state, then it's all of our problem. It is a legislative problem.
Yeah. Anything that we didn't talk about today that you wanted to touch on, or anything that we did talk about that you wanted to expand on?
Oh, I'm always at y'all's whim. I'm happy to, I think that one thing that has happened throughout this election cycle is that there was such an emphasis on, certain topics over any other topic, and such a negative election cycle, right? I think that the things that I would probably touch on, because I'm partisan, I'm very partisan, forget it, I don't care, is like the ads, right? We talked earlier about the ads in the beginning, but we didn't talk about the content of them. and how they impact not just me, but like we in the movement that we're creating. You know, right now we're seeing ads run against me, right? That say that I'm not a good enough Democrat. Again, they said that last time, right? That say that I'm not sufficiently supportive of Joe Biden, right? Though we are a co-equal branch of government, and it is our job to represent the 755,000 people in our district, not just one man. Though there are many, many times where we actually do work together, which is why we've seen so much success in bringing back resources to Western Pennsylvania. Those resources that we've touted, they don't come back without us working with our administration, without President Biden sending his secretaries who have been interested in what we're working on here. That we've been able to create that partnership has been an incredible boon to our region. And not just now, but in the long term, setting that up, right? The best thing that you can do in this place is build seniority. Seniority dictates everything here. And we're starting to do that. We're building that up. But we're combating lies that are never addressed. So picture me, you know, I'm looking at these ads. Again, Summer's not a real Democrat. Very dog whistle ads that impact Black people most. The people who are most susceptible to these are Black people all the time, because Black people want to know why we are not being loyal to the president, because we are most impacted by Trump. So they know that. So they'll lie about it, right? But to see that it was Jeffery Yass, that my opponent is depending on Jeffery Yass, you know, who is, for those who don't know, the uninitiated, right? He is the largest Republican donor in the nation, not in the state, in the nation. He's Pennsylvania's richest man, and he has spent millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to erode public education so that your babies can't go to schools where they'll get a culturally competent and equitable education, no matter what district they live in. That is his biggest thing. He's spent his money to erode abortion rights. So to have an opponent, you know, say that me, a Black woman, first ever, who has been fighting for our democratic values, is vaguely not Democrat as she is, while being run and held up by Republicans, is a problem. It's a problem. But I will say, you know, my opponent asked for 5 debates, but didn't accept this one. We have to be comfortable talking to populations that we don't want to. I've spent a lot of this time talking about Israel and Palestine, right? And engaging in those debates in the most thoughtful and, you know, faithful way that I know how. But I also have to go and talk to Black people. And I got to talk to working class people. When we're talking about what a representative of this district is, it can't be one community or one district or one issue, but all of them.
Right. Excuse me. Quickly on the topic of Palestine and what's going on.
Let me bring it up, laugh it out.
Do you have anything? Do you have anything legislatively that you would like to introduce regarding that, a possible ceasefire or anything? Like where's your movement there?
Certainly, I'm already the co-lead on the ceasefire now resolution. So we introduced that back in October because we were so concerned about the possibility of escalation, which we're now seeing. Right? We cautioned early on that the best pathway was to de-escalate and end the cycles of violence in the region. And we stand by that. And we're joined by the majority of Americans who believe in a ceasefire because they believe in peace, but also human rights organizations from the UN to Doctors Without Borders and Amnesty International and so many others who have practice in this, have seen it and are seeing it firsthand and are also calling for peace and also calling for a ceasefire. I think there was a lot of demonization about me in that position. But the thing that's been so painful is that as more people have joined us, we've not seen similar demonization of those people, right? When it was just the Black and brown progressives who were saying it, right? They've called us everything. And we've faced death threats for calling for peace. And we're still dealing with that. But now there are so many people in legislatures and city councils and state councils and state houses, even here in our region, who have joined us in those calls and have not taken the same, you know, hate or vitriol as we have. But we also recognize that there are multiple communities here that are grieving, that are afraid. And it's unfortunate that anybody would use this as a wedge issue, right? We have multiple beloved communities here. Our Jewish community is a beloved community, right? Our Muslim, our Arab, and our Palestinian communities need to feel as beloved. Our Black and brown communities need to feel beloved. And making sure that we have foreign policy that matches our domestic policy, that it's centered in human rights and justice and accountability is incredibly important. And it's also something that we don't have a blueprint for yet, that we are advocating and leading conversations that have been taboo for so long. So there's going to be trial and error. There are going to be robust conversation around it, but it's important that we have the conversation, because what we're seeing, the way that Netanyahu is conducting this war, is wrong. And we need to call that out. In our government, when we think about more policies that I won't be introducing but already exist, conditioning aid on complying with international law, we have legislation that would do that, that would hold them accountable, all countries accountable to that. Those are the very common sense things that we are advocating for. And it gets lost in the conversation.
Yeah. And I could I'm like looking at my imaginary watch, like how much time do we have?
I look at my imaginary watch all the time.
No, because I'm just, there's so many things that I want to talk with you about and ask you about. I guess it's no secret. I mean, you mentioned it, the sort of target that you wear. I don't quite understand it. I do. I don't. Well, I do understand it. But
I think we should say it out loud.
Yeah.
I'm being held to standards that no one else has ever been held to, right? Yeah. Even as we have one community saying that, oh, well, you're not in that community enough. Though we have talked to so many people, our jobs as representatives is to talk to people, to hear them out, to honor and respect their perspectives, and also the perspectives of everybody in the process as we make our decisions. We've done that. But I've had so many candidates, opponents, colleagues who will never do the same to the Black community and will never be held accountable for it. Yeah. There are certain communities that you just don't have to talk to, right? Even when people say, oh, well, I won't talk to certain publications. I have certain publications that have written explicitly racist pieces about me, to almost no uproar. And people are like, well, why don't you talk to them? Right? The amount of racism that I face, as when we talk about me being the first Black woman, we don't think about the things that I have to deal with that no one else has ever had to deal with. Yeah. Right. We don't think about the ways in which I have to govern that's different than other people. Right. There are a couple bills that people have taken issue with, but they don't know why. Some people know why and some people don't. Right. There's a misnomer that, like, for instance, the debt ceiling, that it was a Biden's debt ceiling. I was like, no, that was Kevin McCarthy's debt ceiling. That was a Republican proposal that the Democrats would have never proposed, that threatened cuts to SNAP benefits, to food nutrition services for Black women. And a number of Black women who were in the most dangerous positions. I know Black women who are in seats that can flip from any bill. And, like, for instance, this Black woman, she said, I can no longer vote against myself. But that's the grace that Black people are not given as we come into positions of power. Right. We come as our whole Black selves. People say that, the Black community should be able to be represented, but people don't allow us the opportunity to actually do things that benefit our community. When we do things to stop policies that harm us disproportionately, when we speak out against those type of policies, people accuse us of not being loyal enough. They accuse us of being pie in the sky. When we take measures, because when we know this policy will hurt Black people, this policy will hurt queer people, and when we say it out loud, they say, why don't you just fall in line?
Right.
What they're fundamentally doing is they're stopping us from being able to represent the people who we are. And it's so not fair, right? It's just so not fair. When we talk about who was harmed by the budget and the debt ceiling, it's always Black and brown people. Right? Cuts to the Department of Labor, to the Department of Education, cut to DEI in Congress, right? Those are Black people who are impacted by that. Mm-hmm. We deserved a better budget, and we could have had one. And we voted our priorities, and people are like, no, you should have just fallen in the line. So people want us to be bold. They want us to be brave and courageous, but when we do it, they also want us to fall in line. So people are not sure. Do you want Black people to be represented? Do you want them to have their priorities heard and centered or not?
Yeah,
and that's the barriers that I have as a Black woman navigating this space for the first time. It's my first year, and people are wondering why I am not, navigating, as if I were a 10-term senator.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's a lot of people are missing, is the fact that, and I think one of the biggest problems I have is the word extreme, which people use to refer to you. And I don't think what people understand, well, they don't understand. It's not that I don't think. The fact is they don't understand that while they label you as extreme, it's extreme for us. like we are dealing with extreme circumstances. So we need somebody who is going to go to the extreme to advocate for us. So so
and not just that, it's not even just that. How often right now, as I've lived in the political world as an organizer, as an activist, and as an elected official, mm-hmm. I have helped expand the electorate. I have turned out more voters than every Facebook person, Facebook advocate. liberal, Democrat than anyone. I've been turning out voters since 2008 with Barack Obama. In 2016, I worked 100 hours a week, y'all, 100 hours a week to defeat Trump. And we lost because people will not listen to people like us and our perspectives, right? And people still question whether or not I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. After all the work, in my first election, I doubled voter turnout. We bring more people to the electoral process. There are Black people in this region who are now excited to vote and participate, who like my predecessor, not my specific predecessor, but people who came before me in politics didn't bother to go and get Black people and young people and progressives. And we're actually doing that, which means that we are actually doing the work to protect democracy, to turn out Democratic voters. And yet we are also the ones who are beat down the most while doing it. But when people call us extreme, call me extreme, they're never having to explain what is extreme.
Right.
They never have to explain it. So what it actually ends up doing is sending a message that Black people should not actually exist in our party. The very people who they're telling must vote blue no matter who, must participate no matter what, are also told to be quiet, to shut up. But right now, I know a number of people who are saying that they won't vote for me if I don't do this thing or that thing. They're laying down red lines, which is fine. They say that even in the general, like I won't vote for her in the general if she doesn't do this thing. So you're telling me that you would rather the Republicans keep the House than you vote for a Black woman, right? But if a Black person or a queer person or a Latina or a brown person goes in and says, I cannot vote for this candidate because they have said racist things, they have implemented racist policies, because they will not come and talk to my community at all. If we say it's you don't know what you're talking about, you need to vote blue no matter who. So there is a grace that is reserved for some and that is withheld from others. And it is always the same way that I have colleagues who vote the exact same way as me, but never get the smoke that I get, never get the disrespect, the condescension, none of that. But do the bare minimum and are treated with respect. You know, I have people who call me by my first name. It's fine. I am Summer. That's what my mama calls me. But I'm just not disrespected the way that white men in politics are. But you're not disrespecting Summer. You are disrespecting my family, my community. You're disrespecting my region. All of the people who feel like this is their first shot. So it's very difficult for me to say that, you know what, if Israel is your one issue, and that is the thing that you will vote on, and that's it, then you also have to allow Black people to be single issue voters too.
Yeah, exactly. I want to.
Let me get too real. This is your.
We're gonna release it. Yeah, we're gonna take a.
Well, I see you somewhere watching. It's like no.
Let's real quick dip into the audience chat, and we do have a question from. It looks like Katie from YouTube wants to ask, and this is regarding the tax discussion we had. How can we get the corporations to pay their fair share taxes?
Woo, that is a multifaceted approach. I'm happy that you asked that, Katie, right? Because it takes coordination between multiple levels of government. You know, when we talk about our corporation, right? Pittsburgh Corporation, you know, it's multiple things, right? We're talking about monopoly powers, you know, things like that come at the federal level. Tax exempt statuses, you know, things of that nature have to go at the city level. We've seen some actions that have happened at the state level through now Governor Shapiro, who was the Attorney General at the time. All of these things have to kind of go and combine to hold them accountable. But there are, for us, you know, we're looking at the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, to figure out what are the enforcement mechanisms that can be put into place for, you know, nonprofits that are, you know, profiting or amassing kind of monopoly status, and the ways in which that impact the healthcare system and regions and cities and states. But that's just one thing. That's just one way. It's actually really not an easy thing to do. So the answer is that every level of government has to be focused on covering their piece so that corporations, companies can't evade their responsibilities to be community partners. And that's, yeah.
That makes sense. We're slowly, the sand in the hourglass is slowly starting to trickle down. I want to get to the final question for you this afternoon, which is, what brings you joy? We try to end everything on a positive, uplifting No.
I know Miracle always said, you know what, Sonny? Miracle asks me this all the time, and I'm never prepared for it.
Okay. I don't know. Yeah, like, and it can be in anything. Like, what do
Okay,
you
I
know?
don't have an answer. What brings you joy?
What brings me joy? Okay. Wow, right? When you flip it back, it does kind of like it is kind of a hard thing. I would say what brings me joy, I love to entertain people. That's what brings me joy. I like to evoke positive responses and reactions from people. I also really love advocacy. That brings me joy, and to sort of like thread that into majority of the work that I do. So like whenever like my journalism work, I created opportunities for myself to advocate, and through my art, as a DJ and an actor as well, I tried to have certain level of advocacy there. So creating spaces, I think it even goes beyond advocacy. I think it's about creating spaces that makes me feel good.
Thank you for buying me that time.
Yeah.
And that's beautiful. That also makes me feel good. Though I don't think I am as hands-on with it as you. I think that people discovering their power and embracing it brings me joy. That is my particular brand of advocacy. Is sometimes I think a lot of people see me advocating for the very large, for the very macro. But I also find joy in the micro, right? When I see an individual find their space in the system and grow in their confidence that actually, because I see this, because I know this, I'll make a difference, right? That gives me joy because it really gives me hope. And it is like the last thread of hope that I have. So people finding their power, embracing their power and wielding it and sharing it amongst others is good for me. So being that little, like that pay it forward spark.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's fulfilling, and it right. Doesn't it make you feel like it makes you feel like there's the like it's like a paycheck for your spirit, right? It's like you get your your paycheck, your direct deposit, whatever, but then there's that very
Then you get a refund. Then you file your taxes. You actually got a refund. It's that.
yeah, exactly. That is the feeling. Question: how can people get in touch with you and your campaign?
Yeah, you can follow us on all social media platforms on X/Twitter. We're going to call it Twitter forever. I am Summer for PA, SUMMERFORPA. On the gram, something like that. Summer Lee for PA. You can find us there. Our website is Summer for PA. So spelled the exact same way. At our website, you can see our issues. You can see our endorsements. You can donate. You can help us fight back against Republican billionaires. You can contact our office to request to volunteer or to request yard signs or anything like that. For my actual legislative office, you can go to all of the official side versions of that. So Rep Summer Lee for Twitter for official side. Summer Lee at Congress.gov, probably something like that, is where you can reach our staff for any of your issues that you may have on the government side. So Social Security or Medicare or passports or anything like that, you can help our staff. Hit our staff. We're located in East Liberty at 211 Tower on South Whitfield. And we would love to help you in either way.
Perfect. We do have some quick reminders for people before we head out. Today is a deadline to request your mail-in ballot. So if you're not going to be in town for Election Day, make sure you request your mail-in ballot by 5 p.m. today. April 23rd is the primary election day. That's exactly 1 week from today. So make sure that you know your polling place, create your voting plan so that you can power up your vote this election season. Also, next Monday, we're actually at 6:30 going to have a special election preview forum for you guys with some of your favorite organizers across Pennsylvania. So make sure you tune in for that. Again, that is Monday at 6:30. Thank you all for joining.
When's the election day? When's election day?
April 23rd.
Tuesday. Wait, no, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
1 week away.
Yeah.
Vote, y'all. Polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can still drop off your mail-in ballot in one of the drop boxes, or you can drop them off at the county elections, the Board of Elections office in downtown. You have until 8 p.m. to get in your mail-in ballots if you don't vote in person.
Yes.
But Tuesday,
one more time.
Tell your friends and your family and your children.
Go over that one more time. Hit the bullets for us just one last time for these people, folks, just in case.
Pennsylvania's primary election day is on April 23rd. That is next Tuesday, and polls are open from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. You can vote in person on that date, or you can still turn in, if you've already requested and have a mail-in ballot, you can turn in your mail-in ballot at one of the county-wide drop boxes that we finally got, or you can take it to the County Board of Elections, or you can put it in the mail. If you're afraid to put it in the mail, you can always take it to the County Board of Elections. You have until 8 p.m. on election night to get your mail-in ballot to the Board of Elections as well.
Perfect.
April 23rd.
April 23rd, I could not have said it better myself. Thank you. And thank you guys all for watching. Again, Monday, 6:30, tune in for our pre-election forum. My name is Royce Jones. This is the One Hood Power Hour. Have a powerful Tuesday. We'll see you next week.
Miracle Jones. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy of One Hood Media. Voting is an opportunity in my community because it gives us a chance to pick our advocates as well as our enemies so that we have the opportunity to build the conditions for liberation that we seek. Whether it's whether or not we have enough money for our sidewalks, if we're going to get tickets for speeding, or if we're going to be able to do community service, who we elect matters for our community. And so if you want better quality air, good schools, good jobs, and even the opportunity to take on your own mental health or reproductive health journey, you got to vote. And that's why I see voting as an opportunity in my community.